Greetings, everybody. Welcome to The Pillars of Digitizing with Erich Campbell, hosted by me, Erich Campbell, where we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to become a digitizer and how to learn, and then a little bit about what makes the best digitizers and the most profitable files for embroidery. Hey, everybody. Sorry you just saw a split screen there for a minute, but later on I'm going to show you a couple things about what we're here for. If you've actually been promoted, you've had some promotions related to the fact that I've got an upcoming webinar and maybe why you're here. But this today is a free-form kind of discussion about the pillars of digitizing, the things that support us and make us good digitizers, how we learn to digitize, what we need to know to digitize well, and eventually a little bit about what we need to be great at digitizing and for our files to be more profitable. So we're going to go ahead and start there. And at the end, I'll give you a little bit more information about my upcoming webinar, Demystifying Next Level Digitizing, as well as remind you of some deals that are going on right now that aren't going to be going on for much longer. But with that, I would like to actually start into where we are at the beginning, the pillars of good digitizing, right? We showed you that little graphic when we started. I'll show you that again. Why do I put that up here? Because like any other construction, we need a good foundation, and then we need some sort of verticals to hold us up. And that is why we call this the pillars of good digitizing. In any case, this is going to be me speaking to you, but I want you to talk back when you want to. If you have questions or comments or things you'd like to discuss, or if you want to agree or disagree, feel free to go ahead and do so in the comments, and I will be checking them out live and answering to some of them live as they come up. So free-form discussion, love to hear from you, love to hear questions. What I can get to or I want to get to, I will. What I can't, I won't. But we'll definitely do this for about the next 30 minutes, and I'll let that open around that time and see if there's some Q&A I can answer anyway. We'll let this be free-form and just give you a little taste of both what there is in digitizing to learn and what we're eventually going to have coming up on Demystifying Next Level Digitizing. But with that, I'd like to talk a little bit, of course, about how do we become digitizers and what do we need to know to become proficient as embroidery digitizers. So if you're here, I'm going to assume you know what embroidery digitizing is. Digitizing, of course, is the process by which we interpret art into a file that controls an embroidery machine that tells it what it needs to do to create an embroidered piece, right? The first thing I'd like to remind people of, and it's something I say in all of my classes, is that as a digitizer, too frequently we think of our product as digitizers as the file, right? We think about the file as our product. But what we have to remember is that our product is the embroidery. Even if we aren't the ones who are going to be serving the embroidery up, that a digitizer is only as good as the embroidery their files produce. So we need to remember that our entire process has to be good through the embroidery and that our file isn't where it stops. So don't get too focused on the file. Make sure you get focused on the embroidery. And as part of that, I'm going to talk about the three pillars that I consider to be the knowledge you need to become a digitizer. So with that, we'll start by saying one thing that I find true about anyone becoming an embroidery digitizer. When people first start out, they are much too focused on software. Frequently, they're looking to me and saying, okay, what software do I want to get? What software, this is the thing, what software makes the best embroidery? The software that makes the best embroidery is the software that fits within your budget and you can use, that has reasonable tools. And I'll say that almost all software out there has reasonable tools for the top, say, 3 stitch types that we often use, especially in commercial embroidery. If you can make a fill stitch and a satin stitch and a straight stitch, and especially with the manual stitch tool involved in that, a point-to-point single stitch, you can recreate anything that you've ever seen in embroidery. The truth of the matter is that tools help us to automate some of those portions of our job to make it quicker, but they don't make us more creative. They don't make us more capable necessarily. They just make it faster and make it a little easier for us to do the job we need to do. So when you're looking at your tools, what I would say is look for the tool that makes the best sense to you, that fits in with your process, and that has the best support, the vibrant user community that you'll want to lean on during the time that you're working. That's something we can get to a little bit later when we talk about how we acquire embroidery knowledge. But here's the first thing. We have 3 types of knowledge we need to know before we start really getting into learning embroidery, if we want to talk about this. And the thing is, everyone starts that software and they always want to know, how do I make an object in my software? That's the question I hear. The truth of the matter is, making an object in your software, pushing the buttons in your software is nowhere near as critical to your end result as the knowledge of embroidery itself. Embroidery knowledge of the terminology and the way things work in digitizing interpretation by far trumps anything you can learn about pushing buttons. Knowing where in a certain kind of software to push a button will not make you a good digitizer. Knowing how embroidery works just might. So consider that first two, guys. Embroidery knowledge, more important to the final produce than software knowledge. So with that, let's talk about the three kinds of things we do need to learn. And these are things you may have heard if you've been in a class with me before, especially a recent class where I talked about bringing digitizing in-house and whether or not someone wants to bring digitizing in-house. Absolutely true that you may have heard some of these things before, but I will say worthwhile to hear it again, especially if you're still debating on learning to digitize, or if as someone who's learning to digitize, you find yourself struggling with certain aspects of it, the chances are you may be focusing in the wrong places. So here are the three things you need to learn. We'll just show them quickly first. Materials and equipment. You have to understand the materials you're working with and the equipment that you're working on. After all, we are controlling embroidery machines. Remember, this file is made to control an embroidery machine. It is not a graphic file that is to be looked at. It is a file that has a set of instructions that controls an embroidery machine. So if we don't understand that, we aren't going to get very far. The next thing is embroidery and digitizing knowledge, right? That's another kind of knowledge we need. And I'm putting in here in parentheticals, I have terms. Why do I have that? Whether we're having embroidery outsourced or we're trying to figure out what something is, knowing some of the basic terms like stitch types, things like that, and terms related to the measurements we see in embroidery, like density. Understanding those terms is critical to being able to analyze what we're looking at and to us asking questions of people either unofficially in user group channels or officially in support channels, or from educators like myself when you want to ask questions. Knowing a little bit about embroidery and digitizing, knowing terms is very important to becoming a proficient digitizer so that you can communicate those things correctly. And certainly knowing the actual underlying function of, say, stitch types and different parts of the embroidery process. And the last one, and to my mind, as I said previously, the least important, is actually software operation. Not that software is unimportant. You need software. We can't do any of this without software. It is the lifeblood of what we do. However, I have seen masterpiece work come out of every manner of software. Some of the most favored work I have ever done comes out of the worst software I ever used. There was a DOS-based, if you don't know DOS, this is previous to Windows, DOS-based digitizing software. It could only display 16 colors and it couldn't draw circles or curves. And that software I used to make some of the best pieces I ever worked on, and pieces that are still lauded that won awards. And this is because I had to be very conscientious and control every stitch. The problem I had with that software was incredibly slow and hard to use and painful to use. Due to that, it's not that I would recommend it. It doesn't exist anymore. You can't even get it. However, it doesn't mean, like I said, software operation isn't unimportant. But the thing is, if you don't know the why of where you, like, why do I want to put a block of stitches in a place? Or why do I want to use a certain kind of density? Then knowing how is immaterial, because you won't even know why you're putting something somewhere or where to put it. So understanding how to draw a shape, understanding how to set densities, those sorts of things, absolutely important, but not of the most importance. So let's go back to materials and equipment and kind of run down a little bit of the kind of things you need to know. And certainly the things you're going to need to know with materials and equipment, you have to understand how an embroidery machine functions. If you have not operated an embroidery machine when you start digitizing, the first thing you should do, the first way you should be looking for experience is to find someone with good digitized files that you can run on a machine, or purchase files, hire them out, and get on a machine and run. I have had better luck in my life training operators of embroidery machines to become digitizers, much better luck at times than I have to get people who are good at graphic software, who are vector designers, to become digitizers. It doesn't mean they can't or that they don't make the jump. In fact, some of them make the jump quite spectacularly, especially if they are awesome artists and then have a sense of what materials do. But quite frequently, I have a quicker time getting someone to basic proficiency as a digitizer if they have already run an embroidery machine and understand how it works. If you understand how they trim, how they jump, how they run, and if you have watched materials work in the hoop, right? If you have seen the interaction between the needle, the thread, the fabric and the stabilizer. You know that there are certain grains of fabric that react with embroidery. If you have vertical stitching on something that has a vertical rib, you're going to find gapping and stretching and show through problems if you don't have an underlay that's holding it up. But you won't know that down to your bones until you've run a machine. So for me, materials and equipment is huge. You need to be an operator at some point. Even if you're digitizing, you've never had any operations time on an embroidery machine, I would really recommend that you find an embroidery machine that you can be around. Even if you are not in a shop currently and you want to learn to digitize, you need to operate to get the best sense of it. So that interaction is important. Also, things like stabilizers, right? You need to know that a cutaway stabilizer behaves differently than a tearaway stabilizer, and why. You need to understand that the thickness of thread is the basic unit in embroidery, and we understand how much coverage we have, density, right? That's a term thing that we're going to talk about in the next section. You have to understand that that measures how close rows of thread are to each other, and that the thickness of thread changes what those density numbers should be to get coverage, and to know what happens when you build up density in a design beyond what it should, how it stretches. Yeah, you have to know things like how hooping affects the way things turn out also, so that you can diagnose designs when you see that something's gone wrong. If you don't know these things, if you don't have materials and equipment information, so you don't know how an embroidery machine runs, if you haven't spent time on it yourself, if you don't know how materials react, you're going to have a lot harder time with digitizing, because a lot of the things we do that are technical, when someone says, how do I handle pull compensation? Well, you'll know that we need to add pull compensation. We need to thicken our satin stitches when we're on a more lofty material. If you have run a design that you already know what it looks like on a loftier material than it was intended for and watched all of the satin stitches suck in and get narrow, it is a way to get that experience quickly. And nothing like seeing it in the thread. I mean, like in the flesh, in the thread. Nothing like seeing that. Nothing like running it yourself will teach you quite as well. Does it mean that you can't learn without being on an embroidery machine? No. I think, however, it is the quickest way to do it. And as I said, even on the last show I did today, and I've done a couple of live shows already today. If you've been with me several times, guys, thank you so much for paying the attention. But one of the things I always share is that I used to run 2 12-head embroidery machines, 6-needle machines that did not have trim sensors that worked, or trim sensors at all, to my knowledge. This meant that I ran up and down these machines, watching them, hoping that I could stop it in time if there was a thread break. Nothing can teach you like the pain of messing up something when you are running back and forth like that. You'll know very quickly if you have tiny short stitches that break thread, because certainly you will have to stop that machine and back it up and watch it run and realize when it does it over and over in the same place that it has something to do with your design. So embroidery is a holistic thing. The design has to be good, as does the use of materials, and the machine has to be in good operation, and all these things come together to make embroidery work. Well, that's best understood by operators to some degree, and by knowing your materials and equipment. So definitely understand, guys, materials and equipment, super huge. The second thing, and these are, by the way, I will even say I think these are in order of the importance. Knowing this first, materials and equipment first, be the way to get your entry, and probably the most important to your eventual success. The second thing that helps you to become successful as a digitizer is knowing embroidery and digitizing, and like I said, terms. You have to understand what certain kinds of stitches are. You have to know what a satin stitch is, what a zigzag stitch is, what a fill or tatami stitch is, and how it operates. So what I mean by that is that satin stitches all pulling in one row tend to show a lot of pull compensation, or pull distortion tend to get narrower. You need to know that that pull distortion happens, or that when you stack threads up and you make a nice satin stitch, that it always pushes toward the open ends of the satin stitch. Hence why a capital I as a column is taller than the letter next to it if it's not compensated correctly. If you have an E with the bars horizontally, and then you have the I with the open ends, well, the I pushes up and down, the E sucks in on both sides. That's pull and push distortion. And so those are the terms that you need to look for to understand pull and push compensation. And you now know how a satin stitch works. You know both the material functioning of how it works, and you know that that happens more acutely with satin stitches than fill, because they line up on a column, whereas satin stitches are fill stitches rather are stepped, and they don't all pull toward one central axis. Understanding pull and push compensation, understanding underlay and how it functions. That underlay lifts up top stitching and gives some color coverage, and edge underlay provides a rail for stitches to grab onto so that they can make sharp edges. There are reasons why we use these things, and they're not just to stack stitches into the design, or not even just for coverage. We're building a structural three-dimensional object from these stitches. And understanding that is by understanding these embroidery elements, and by watching them work in a design, by watching them on a machine. These are the things that are going to give us the best experience so that we can understand this knowledge. And the other thing is, when we're discussing this with either, say we're outsourcing, we decide not to digitize, or so we're discussing this with an educator, we want to understand that. Knowing what a satin stitch is or a column stitch, they have different terms sometimes depending on your software. Knowing what a straight stitch is, it's a row of stitches. Knowing that a bean stitch is a multiplied row of stitches where every stitch is done multiple times, generally odd, because an odd number will travel to one direction. 1, 2, 3, and then it continues on. Odd numbers go forward, even numbers are going to go back. They're going to continue back to our original point. We now know when we're discussing these things with people what we can ask about or for. And then things like density. Density, people will think, is a measure of how much thread there is. Density, as it's expressed, is actually a measure of the space in between courses of thread. If you look at a density that says it's 4 points, what it means is between two courses from one line measured over a second to the third in a fill stitch, that measurement is 0.4 millimeters, because an embroidery point is 1/10 of a millimeter. 4-point density, 0.4 millimeter density, it's the space between those courses of stitching. And we know that 4-point density is full coverage for a 40-weight thread. If you don't know the terms for the thickness of thread, if you don't know that thickness of thread makes a difference, if you don't understand what stitch types there are, it becomes harder for you to describe that to someone, and it becomes harder for you to understand why you would put them where. If you know that fill stitches are good for filling out flat, large areas, satin stitches are great for describing something that is like a column that is rounded. If you understand these things about stitch types, if you know what they are, it's easier to describe them, and it's easier to figure out where to put them. So this actually does also bleed over into design interpretation. You should know that generally at a certain size that you want to use a satin stitch for a columnar, thin, or rectangular object, generally under 10 millimeters of width and above 0.8 millimeters width, right? These are general things you learn. But you need to know these things in order to digitize, because to digitize is to interpret art into the medium of embroidery. We have to understand our measurements. We have to be able to respond with them and discuss them with people. And we have to know about how we're choosing or why we would choose to use a certain kind of stitch in an area. So I would call that the second pillar of digitizing, right? The first, let's go back and review. The first one, of course, being materials and equipment. Know how your machine operates, how many jump cycles it takes to trigger a trim, how to get a frame out for your applique, how to run a machine, and then watch the machine operate so you actually see how it moves, the apparent motion of it, and the interaction for materials between the needle, thread, stabilizer, and fabric. You have to watch those and see how things change when you change one of those things. Then you have to understand your embroidery digitizing terms. So, well, embroidery digitizing and the terms thereof. All the terms about embroidery stitches, what they are, the terms of digitizing itself, understanding what those stitch types are and that you have to draw, and sequencing and pathing is another one, where in the sequence something goes, and pathing is the apparent travel through a design. Generally, we're trying to make that happen without picking up our needle, without trimming as much as possible to be efficient. So we need to know these terms and understand why they exist and what they're for. So that's the second pillar of good digitizing for the foundation, right? And the third, and only the third, in my opinion, also in importance, is software operation. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are going to have to digitize in our software, right? So software operation are the things we need to do with our software in order to make the digitizing happen, in order to do the interpretation. And these are, of course, all of our tools. We need to learn how to draw shapes. Now, whether this is with traditional embroidery tools, like when you want a satin stitch column and you use a sided entry, either we have that kind of ladder style sided entry where you enter points on either side as we travel in a ladder fashion, or we enter all the points on one side and then all the points on the other side for that sided entry. Or we use shape drawing tools, traditional shape drawing tools that are more like a vector art style. Either we use what's called a spline, which is where you say, I want hard points or curved points or cusps, and the line travels and bends almost like a wire. It has some resistance, some spring to it, and the line bends around as we drop these straight and curved points. That's one type of entry, spline entry. Or we have something like Bezier curve entry, which is very much like Illustrator or CorelDRAW. If you've ever used a vector drawing software, you may have entry like that where you see handles that you pull and stretch the handles and change the angle of the handle in the incidence to the shape itself to get a different kind of curve. Whatever that is, that's one of the main things we're definitely going to have to do is understand how to draw shapes. Then we're going to have to know how to set the start and end points of each of these shapes, because embroidery, as we know, travels in a sequence. Lest we forget, these are not just shapes that exist. These are commands for a machine, and the machine runs in sequence and in layers. So software operation will help us to understand literally how we set our start and end points, how we set things like branching or other automation to help us get that sequence done correctly, how we set stitch angles or inclination lines. So if we have our satin stitch arc, we can tell where we drop our lines across it to set stitch angles to make sure that the satin stitch follows our arc, right? All of these things are part of software operation, as well as things like setting our densities, controlling our short stitching, perhaps, depending if that's automated or controlled, dealing with trims and jumps and functions that the machine needs to undertake, whether those are automatically processed or they're part of what we do creatively, where we do those manually. Those are all part of what we need to do, as well as outputting of the actual file. The end of that software operation chain is understanding what file our embroidery machines need and how to create a file that has the right formatting for that and that has our production formatting handled. If we have things like team names, how do we set it up so that we have a name on each head so we can turn our multi-head machines on and off, or switch our garments out in between colors and keep running our names after we have that logo placement done. Things like that. Those are all software operation. And what I say is, honestly, software operation can be taught through official support from our software companies. It can be taught through literally through reading the manual. The manuals are, having been someone who's written a portion of a software manual and been around the people who do, the manuals are full of more than just the button pushing. They often even have a little bit of digitizing education in them. So if you haven't looked at a manual for the software you currently have, or you haven't looked at the manual of the software you want to buy, it's worthwhile looking at that digital manual and having a go at the different sections that are interesting to you. So software operation, including, like I said, drawing, setting all of our stitch types, setting all of our variables, and then, of course, at the end, understanding how to do our output and our production work in software, right? These are our pillars. So we'll go back over again, the kinds of knowledge that you need. You need the knowledge of materials and equipment, the materials of embroidery, how they affect the end product, your stabilizers, your material itself, the fabric of the embroidery, support materials like water-soluble toppings, adhesives, any of the things we need that support us, and our equipment, our machines, the trim codes, the jump codes they need, how they operate, how they frame out, how they do applique, and what that means to our eventual file. All these things need to be there. Materials and equipment, the ability to run machines. The second thing, of course, embroidery and digitizing terms. We'll follow that one more time. Understanding stitch types, understanding compensation, understanding the measurements involved, and knowing how to communicate about these. Super critical to know embroidery and digitizing terms so that we can describe things. This is also interpretation. What kinds of stitches are used for what sort of objects? And this is something, by the way, that gets covered in some detail when I'm discussing this in the webinar we've referred to in Demystifying Next Level Digitizing. There will be some discussion of this, as well as artistic things like texture. And at the end, of course, software operation. You have to be able to operate your software. You have to know how to use both the automated tools and the manual tools and the drawing so that you can express the types of stitches you want to express, the things that you want. Those qualities need to be able to be placed in an area, in a sequence, and layered. And these are things that require you to understand software operation. But if you ask me, as I've said many times, people start in software operation. Where do I push the button inside of my software to do X topic? When what they need to start with is materials and equipment and the embroidery and digitizing terms. If you don't have embroidery experience as an operator, you really ultimately need to get some. Now, the other thing I'd like to go into before we finish out here, and by the way, ask questions. I haven't seen any questions in the comments. I would love to have more questions here, and I'm going to stop real quick and just say hi to somebody. You know, Penny, hi. Thanks for joining in, Penny Bar. So anybody else who wants to ask questions or bring comments, absolutely bring comments before we get done here. But I am going to jump into some things that make a digitizing file profitable and more than just the average digitizing file. And these are the kinds of things that I'm going to talk about somewhat in Demystifying Next Level Digitizing, and that I will continue on as we do that class, as that webinar comes up 1 month from now. And these are the things I find to be the pillars of great digitizing. Because there's a difference between good digitizing, good enough digitizing, being able to get the stitches on a garment and have the garment turn out well and wearable and represent what we want it to do. That's good enough digitizing. What's next is great digitizing. Great digitizing hinges on these 3 pillars. Number 1, production efficiency. As a commercial digitizer, if you want to be something more than the average, part of what you want to do is always going to be about production efficiency. If you can do it in 6 color changes where someone else does it in 12, your file is better, provided they both look at least the same, if not better. Production efficiency is limiting unnecessary movement so that your start and end points look like they should and don't move too much. You don't jump, run around, use excess stitching to travel, or trim constantly. If there's ways to avoid trimming, you travel instead of trim. Production efficiency is to avoid excess movement, avoid excess processes that might slow down the run, slow down the machine. Production efficiency, especially color changes. Excess color changes, I think, are a good way to see a novice digitizer because they will continually work into a color over and over and over rather than understanding the possibilities of the layering. I mean, we always want to work dimensionally, something you'll hear a lot about in Demystifying Next Level Digitizing, how we work from back to front, how we overlap things to make real dimensions so you can see that something includes something behind it. Those are all things you do to use to make texture, but you can also work on your efficiency and order things in such a way that we travel when we can, we don't jump and trim when we don't have to, as that's one of the places where you're always going to have the most chance of pulling thread out of the needle or having a break or having some other catastrophic problem that's going to stop the machine. Production efficiency, huge deal. Run only the stitches you need. What I like to say is you want to practice stitch consciousness. Be conscious on the level of the stitch, not the object, not the file. The level of the stitch, meaning that we run only the stitches we need and none we don't. It means light densities. It means a light hand on the garment so the garment flows and feels nice, is nice to wear, and that increases the perceived value of our product because it feels good. It gives the customer a good experience of the garment personally, not just a good look. So when the looks are equal, efficiency is going to be one of the differentiators between a good digitizer and a great digitizer. Second thing is stitch quality. And when I talk about stitch quality, this is literally just the quality of the rendering. Good digitizers have a great, can have a fine enough look, a good look that represents the logo well. Stitch quality in this case means that we are very consistent about the quality we have in our stitches and about how we prep things for embroidery. So we have adequate overlaps. We have all of our compensation done so that we have lovely straight lines on the top and bottom of text. This is all stitch quality stuff that might be maybe extra careful for other digitizers. As a great digitizer, we make sure that quality is there. And we look to things that are textural, not just artistically, but we say we have smooth textures where they belong, rough textures where they belong. We think about how those stitches also work in a place, in an actual context. If someone works in landscaping and they have the chance of snagging their stitches all the time, having nice satin stitch text with big long loops, even though it might look right and be the technical right choice for the digitizer, knowing that context and using, say, a fill stitch with a nice tight satin border so you still get a clean edge, but the fill stitch is less likely to snag. That's from good to great. Understanding the stitch quality and relating it to the context in which the garment is used, that makes you a great digitizer more than a good digitizer. So knowing stitch qualities, knowing what length and loft do in a design and how they operate, how they work, what makes things more durable, what makes things more attractive, and working with that, that's part of it, stitch quality. So also, like, when you're trying to do really large text and they do want it to look satin-like, but you don't want it to be loopy, using things like length limit or split satins with lovely edge padding so you get shiny borders. Being aware of things on that stitch level and trying to use the qualities of embroidery to their best effect, that's part of stitch quality, certainly. And like I said, light hand, good densities, structural underlay, all part of stitch quality. But more than that, we take it one step above that for the greatest level of digitizing. That's with artistic interpretation, right? With artistic interpretation, what we're saying is We are using our medium. If embroidery is a medium, like oil paint is a medium, there are qualities it has that are specific to it. Embroidery, especially with standard threads, it has a high sheen, it shows light and shadow very well, and it has texture. It is a three-dimensional art, not a flat art. It is not print. It is an object. Each thread is an object, and we can use this. We can use our stitch angles. We can use multiple blocks of stitches. Even if we see a field where we have one silhouette that is unbroken, we can break it up into different parts and pieces so that we get texture, so that we produce something that in embroidery is more than the print, more than the art, that uses embroidery to elevate the rendering. And that's something that we will definitely talk about. It is the crux of the first third of the Demystifying Next Level Digitizing webinar, is entirely based on that. And it goes from dimensionality into structure, into texture. So thinking about embroidery as a dimensional, 3D, textural art, as a fiber art, and not as a way of just reproducing a logo, is where we are with the webinar. And that's the thing, artistic interpretation, that's what sets you apart from the good. So what sets us apart? What makes for the best, most profitable pieces? And by the way, profitable as well, artistic interpretation, because if we have something that looks better, looks novel, draws attention in a world where our work is used to promote brands, businesses, groups, and clubs, then we win, because we can provide more eyeballs. We can get more attention with our novel, interesting treatments of embroidery. So what are those three things, once again, that I think turn you from a good digitizer to a great digitizer? An eye for production efficiency. Whatever we can do to get our embroiderers or our embroidery departments to have the most runs possible, to have the easiest runs possible. We want to make happy operators. Besides, if we've done our jobs, we've also been operators ourselves. That's what we want to do. Production efficiency, make things run quickly, get more runs in a day, use less thread, use less equipment, use less stabilizer to get the end result we want. Production efficiency. Stitch quality, use stitches in the proper way, make sure that they are suited to their context, make sure that they work the best way they can. And of course, artistic interpretation, taking what's in front of us and realizing where the possibilities of embroidery make for something more, something different than you can get from print. So that's what we're working with. I'm going to jump to the comments now, guys, before I get done, and talk a little bit more shortly. So Penny says, where's the best place to start with someone that is new? For me, absolutely, I would say to get them on an embroidery machine and have them run it and pay attention and take notes. After that, it would be to analyze designs in software, and we'll talk about that. Of course, if you take the webinar, you'll get more about that too. But certainly it's to watch designs run on screen. So use the slow replay or the replay ribbon. And there's multiple ways you can call this, but it's where you watch a design play out virtually. We want to do that at the same time as getting them on actual embroidery, especially with an existing embroiderer that has some skill, to get them to understand both the materials and the stitch types terminology, and then to watch those actually play out between the screen and the stitch out. So that's something you should do with that. And then we have this, Ramona, thank you. Layering with multiple colors, absolutely. Layering with multiple colors is a big deal as well. Being able to use color and texture at the same time. Those are things that are artistic, guys. So really, when I talk about demystifying next level digitizing, there's going to be a lot. It's less about color, less about blending. That's another thing I'll be teaching in a future webinar. But there is definitely a lot about layering and how that works and how to use stitch types to get dimension and dense, and not just density, not that kind of dimension, but we're talking about literally building up layers and dimension using the stitch angles to get light to play over a surface. So some interesting things there. Okay, so webinar, will it be replayable? We're talking about the webinar, Demystifying Next Level Digitizing. Absolutely. You will be able to replay that at any time you want to, for sure. Cindy, is it really live? Yes, it's really live. I am on with you right now. So, so yes, if you're seeing that, hopefully it should be live. If not, refresh your page. But yes, you are live. I'm not answering in the comments as much as just speaking out loud. But yes, Renee, one more time, will the webinar be replayable? Yes. If you decide to purchase the webinar, you're going to have it replayable. And also, you'll have access to me, and I'll make sure that anybody who doesn't get what they need out of that, you'll be able to replay it one way or another. But it is intentionally going to be replayed. As it's playing out right now, it will be an actual private YouTube video is really the delivery method right now. It makes the most sense for us, but certainly you'll be able to get in and replay it as needed. So yeah, if you do the webinar, for sure, that's how that's going to go. So let's see here. Let's go with a couple more comments before we get done. I'm actually going to go a little long. Let's go into bonus time, folks. There we have that. Ramona McKee. Yes, people want to do all of one color at a time. They don't understand that the colors are layered for a reason. Surely they're layered for a reason. Absolutely. You don't always sort all colors down. What I'll say is sometimes there's places where a novice digitizer will overdo it, where they will have colors that are not layered, and they'll have them separated into different areas, and they'll just go ahead and keep changing colors because especially with a lot of stock designs, you may find that they're especially on a single needle machine, people are willing to change those things and do that, certainly. So that's something that we're going to do, is talk about that. But yeah, no, it's layering for a reason. Absolutely. Layering, like I said, we want to occlude something in the background for a reason, because this thing is supposed to physically look like it's behind this thing. And sometimes that means our stitches have to be layered and that the colors are in different layers. What I'll say is that there is a difference between an efficient machine, like an efficient design for production on the machine, and a design where someone has been a little careless and they've done all their layering, but they didn't really think about, could they be more efficient with the piece? There's actually a balancing act that has to be done. But Ramona is correct. You can't always sort down to one color at a time. When necessary, you absolutely visit a color more than once, but it's not always necessary. So that's one of those things. Cindy says, you've been on all day. Yes, I have. I've been on all day one way or another. I've done multiple things that were live, guys. There's that. Oh, and then we have Aaron. Thank you, Aaron, for jumping in. Yes, it will be replayable. You will have access to it forever, including all the Q&A that happens at the end. This is absolutely true. Absolutely. That, and what I'll say too is that for the people who join in, and we're going to talk about this in a second, who get a live call with me, I fully authorize everybody to record that, and we will work something out so that you can record the Q&A with me if you get that live Q&A, because I have no problem with people listening to that more than once as well. We may, in fact, do the Q&A over a video channel of some sort so that we can get that done if you want a video of us doing our Q&A. So anybody who does the initial thing and gets that done, absolutely, I'm going to let you guys record that and cover it repeatedly. The webinar... We were talking about when does it start, and I'm not great about this. Okay, it starts at 11 a.m. Central Time. So we're going to talk about this. Let's go ahead and jump in real quick with this, which is the sign-up sheet for the Demystifying Digitizing webinar, right? The question we had was, what time does the webinar start, Penny? Here's where it is. It's going to be Saturday, March 28th, 2020, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., plus plenty of additional live Q&A, and that's Central Time, US and Canada. What I'm going to say is I would, if you're blocking out your day, leave till 3 p.m. open, because I'd like to have some breaks in between, and I would like to have that for everybody to go on. And by the way, Aaron, thank you for being in the comments. Aaron Montgomery of the Decorators Community and Two Regular Guys, he is helping me run this. So if you are happy that I'm doing this, give Aaron a pat on the back the next time you see him, because he is the one who has gotten me out of the, once again, virtual office, virtually tied to the desk, and going to do this outside of just the trade shows. We're going to start doing more of these webinars. If this takes off, especially if you guys sign up for it, and we can make sense of it, we'll absolutely do that. Cindy says, should we buy our embroidery machines or software? No, not at all. This is going to be theory. I'm going to be lecturing and showing you images. You're going to be getting yourselves a copy of the slides. You'll get a copy of my handouts that help you out with all the settings. This is something that you should sit, watch, listen, take notes, ask questions, and let it soak in. The things that I'm going to teach you are going to be like that. So definitely come in, learn that stuff. You don't have to be buying embroidery machines or software. You can do this on any software. And frankly, I'm going to make sure you know. And when I will try as best I can to use terms for all the software. So if you're talking about splitting down a satin stitch, I will definitely be saying, okay, it is a length limit stitch or an auto split stitch or a split satin stitch, or here are the ways to do it. To the best of my knowledge, I will use as many embroidery terms as I can so you can understand this no matter what software you use. And if you have any trouble in your own software, of course, I'll be taking questions and answers for that. So let's see here. Hate when my top satin stitch opens up gaps in my fill base. What I'm going to tell you this right now, I'm going to give you guys a little early hit, because this is not in the webinar. Instead of having your things align at the same angle, let's say you have a 0 angle fill, and I'm going to go ahead and go full screen with myself so I can talk to this. Mike Mel Downey, thank you for the question. When you have a fill, like let's say we have a fill here, and we have borders at the top on the sides, a nice square, and that fill starts to have, when you see your satin stitches go on here, that fill is at a 0 angle, you'll see that your satin stitches come and they grab the top of the fill and they open it up. And they open up little gaps in your fill base, right? First thing you can do, everybody wants to do this. They want to turn it 45 degrees so that you can't really, it doesn't pull, it slides out. Problem is 45 degrees is a weak angle on your fabric. Most fabrics are strong horizontally and vertically, or they're strong vertically, depending if it's a knit where it likes to stretch. But wovens will be weak on the 45, and all of them are weaker on the 45 stretch. Grab a piece of fabric, grab it at the 45 degree angle, and stretch it, you'll see it's weak. So don't use a 45 degree angle fill. Back it down to like 15 to 20 degrees. 15 degrees, 20 degrees off the horizontal is enough that when it tries to grab that fill, it'll not break open the edges quite so poorly. So think about that, guys. When you have a bordered fill stitch, don't let those angles be completely perpendicular where it pulls apart the fills. Go ahead and use like 15 to 20 degrees. You don't need 45. 45 is too weak on the fabric. It's going to cause a lot of stress, but anywhere honestly from 12 to 20, depending on your tastes for how much it'll split up at the top and bottom, will help you. So there you go, Mike. Freebie, 15 degree fill helps out, guys. So that's always nice. Let's go ahead and go a couple more times here. Let me reiterate. Aaron, thank you. March 28th, 11 a.m. Central Time. And Brian says, thank you, Brian, for tuning in. Pat for Aaron. Yes, Aaron is driving all of us to do our best, and he's helping us to provide that tide that's going to raise all of our little embroidery ships until we make our industry the best it can be. So thank you, Aaron. And Cindy also says thank you. So Aaron, thank you. And here we are. Aaron actually puts this on those personal call spots. We can use Zoom and record those for people to have afterwards. Checking right now, only 16 of those left. Yes, the next 16 people, if you go ahead and sign up today, tomorrow, whenever, before these other people sign up, before people make their decisions, you tip over first, you're going to have a private call with me and I'm going to handle some things with you. So you'll be able to ask me personal questions if you want to, I guess. I meant questions that were personal to your shop, but hey, you want to ask about my history for the time that you have, it's your time, folks. You can record it. I won't hold anything back. But yes, absolutely. We're going to use Zoom or something like Zoom so that we can get that done. And Penny, you just signed up. I am so happy to have you, Penny. This also means you get to ask those personal calls. Cindy, if you already signed up, you are already on. So that means you got the call. Get ready for something to talk about. If you want to talk to me about this stuff, you will get private education, Cindy, since you are already signed up. Also, Aaron jumps on. Thanks, Brian Bailey. I love being a part of great education, and Eric embodies that. Thank you. That was super nice. I appreciate it. And Brilliance does too, so a huge win for everybody. Yes, anybody who's coming from that side of the world, the Brilliant side of the world, we are all about this education. We're going to try and bring as much of this that we can to you also as freebies, but we are trying out this method because this really allows me to spend a little extra time with everybody. And we're trying to use this. By the way, this supports the decorators community. This is how the decorators community is going to get started, where people from the Two Regular Guys world, from the Dax show world to some degree, and people like Jay Bissell, and honestly, Terry Combs from Two Regular Guys, people like us and Clay from Corral Trainer. We're all coming together to get you vetted education that is from people who are experienced in the industry, who know what they're doing, and people who we trust. So if you want to support that, that's another way you support that, is by supporting this webinar. This is not a huge cash grab for me. This is not what makes the most money. It's not the thing that I'm trying to do. What this is to make sure that you've got some skin in the game and that we can support doing this in the future and be able to have the equipment and the means to be able to bring you more education. So if you want to do this, let me go back to the page we had one more time just to show you guys. This is the page. We've already had the link earlier up in the comments. But if you want to get in on that, there is a link available right now. Let me grab that for you if I can. Here we go. I'm going to show this on screen for you. bit.ly/ErichDD, and that's Erich if you're somebody coming from Two Regular Guys world. And the thing is, right now, through tomorrow, you actually get $100 off if you sign up and use the code, I'll show it one more time, regulator, and I'll put that up as a banner. If you use the code regulator through tomorrow, you'll be able to get $100 off that sign-up fee. And still, like I said, we still have about 16 spots remaining where I'll give you a private call and you'll be able to get some one-on-one answers with me outside of the Q&A that we're doing for the webinar, so we can actually have a little review over the things you need the most. So like I said, this is a grand experiment, folks. This is something that we're doing to try and find out if this is what you want out in the world, and we're trying to help out people to do that. So Mike says, Can't participate in the webinar this time, prior engagement, do it again someday. Absolutely. This is something I want to keep doing. And we're going to work with Aaron. We haven't worked this out just yet, but I think we'll find a way where we can make this a little more evergreen, where somebody who doesn't get in on the live can just get the recording. That may be a thing. It currently is not. So really the best way, if you can show up, is to do this live. So absolutely, there'll be a way to do that. And Cindy also says, can we use it later time after you figure out what you taught us? Surely. You don't have to make that call now. And frankly, I'll have to admit that I have to schedule it around when I'm traveling and the duties I have in Brilliance. So what I would say is you want to use your call later after you've worked on things or done some sampling or decided what to work on. You want to show me a file and have me work on it with you during that call. That's always a possibility. So yeah, you can totally use your call later. So if you signed up already, or if you signed up soon, the chances are you'll get that call. Go ahead and save that, bank it back, and we will schedule as we can. So that's that. And also, Aaron would like to remind everybody, you can still get the content even if you can't show up. It is available after. So if you decide you just want to be there, but you can't participate in the live Q&A, absolutely, you can do the live Q&A. And Cindy, that sounds great. I think so too. This is something I've wanted to do with people. So absolutely, that would be the way to go. And okay, we have Aaron coming in with Erich. Yes, Erich, that's me, my man. I didn't want it to be me, but apparently it is. So Terry Combs gets to love himself a little bit more today because he managed to get that to stick. And I need that hat, the Erich hat. Well, I'll tell you what, I know one person who certainly knows how to make a hat, at least in the building right now. And since I'm entirely alone, I can always make the Erich hat if I want to punish myself for it, but it might be a while before I make myself the Erich hat. I don't know if I can buy into it like our own friend Jay Bassell buys into his taco branding. But with that, folks, I'm going to go ahead and close up shop. I was originally slated for about 30 minutes. We are at 48 fully in bonus time. I can't thank you enough for showing up. It was excellent. And once again, I'm going to put that up for you guys. If you want to join in on the webinar, through tomorrow, folks, save $100 by using the code regulator. If you're somebody coming from that Two Regular Guys world, you know what that is. That's what we call our fans, regulators. And if you'd like to support the decorators community and ongoing education from the people who know what they're doing, absolutely, it's a way to go. Also, just check out decorators community through the Two Regular Guys and see the other things that are out there. See the other educators who we support. I would love for you to check their stuff out. Like I mentioned, Jay Bassell, his book, Your Style Guide, is out. If you have a small business, it is an excellent guide and well worth the money for it. So would love to have you out. But if nothing else, I'd really like to see you guys out there for Demystifying Next Level Digitizing. It is absolutely something that I am passionate about. I want you to be able to make the best digitizing you can. I want you to have higher perceived value, higher profits, and to be expressing yourself creatively in the way that you want to. So from me, Erich Campbell, and from the end of this long day of content, thank you very much for showing up, and absolutely love having you out there. And by the way, last few comments, Jay, you crushed it. From you, Jay, it means a lot, man. Aaron, thank you, man. Glad to share. Cindy, thank you. Watch the replay. There's some good stuff in there. And if not, you know where to find me. Thanks for the shout out, Jay. You deserve it. Taco Tuesday every day, my dude. And thank you. Bye, folks. See you later at the webinar.